Good morning, my name's Pat Gwyer, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'd like to introduce my colleague Phoebe Kingston to talk about some of her interests and experiences in mental health systems. Start off with Phoebe, if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so there's actually quite a lot of things that I do and I'm involved in, so it might take a few minutes for me to go through all my roles, but I'd like to talk a little bit about them because it really gives people an idea of my passions and my interests and all my sort of commitments in this field. So firstly, I'm a person of lived experience of mental and emotional distress and a mental health diagnosis of a so-called severe and enduring mental disorder. I'm not that keen on the term consumer because I feel that the word consumer implies choice, and I don't think that's the case for many, but I sort of use terms interchangeably so people can pick what they, be inclusive. So my main bread and butter job at the moment, although I'm just about to reduce my hours in this role by 50% at New Year to cover another role, is as a peer support worker for a health service provider here in Western Australia, WA, where I live. I'm also a professional speaker, and I do some international speaking, conferences, seminars, forums, sometimes some panel chats, workshops and trainings and things like that. And I'm a registered speaker with two of our peak mental health bodies out here in WA. So Consumers of Mental Health WA, which we refer to as COMWA, and the Western Australian Association of Mental Health, generally just referred to as WAM. But I actually guest lecture as well for three universities out here, Murdoch, Edith Cowan and Curtin University. But I'm most heavily involved at Curtin University because that's where I did a snippet of tertiary study and qualified through the Lived Experience Educators Unit, the LEE unit, and that was through the University School of Occupational Therapy, Social Work and Speech Pathology. And that LEE unit, look, it was the first of its kind in Australia. It was created a very innovative project called the Valuing Lived Experience Project, the VLEP we call it. And it's really about educating people of lived experience at a sort of tertiary level on not just crafting your story and things like that, but actually some of the much richer consumer history here and overseas, the controversy in the field, consumer activism, who the activists are and what they say, and reading consumer academia and being familiar with who the consumer academics are that are most prominent here in Australia and overseas, and teaching us to be able to lecture with some actual consumer academic content and sort of related activist kind of perspectives. So it gave us a formal qualification through the university's School of OT and Social Work, and we've had, look, I've been involved in numerous projects within the VLEP since 2016, and I feel really privileged to have worked in the spaces that I've worked in at the uni. They really do value lived experience in the education of their mental health professionals on all sorts of different levels. So I won't go into all the separate projects, but it was a wonderful well, it's always a wonderful experience because I do a lot of work there all the time. We've recently, my esteemed peer colleagues and I, and our consumer academic at Curtin University, we co-designed and co-produced a 4-part tutorial series, which was an introduction. We've aimed it to be an introduction to next year's LEE unit, which hopefully we'll be tutoring on and co-producing as well. So that's really exciting. I've got another significant role. I'm now the deputy chair to a gentleman named Alan, one of my professional mentors, and in succession planning with him to be chair of the North Metropolitan Health Service, Mental Health, Public Health and Dentistry Services Community Advisory Council peak body. So it's a very long title. Well, I'm just going to refer to it.
Yeah, that is a very long title. It sounds like you need an acronym to summarise that up.
Yeah. So with just acronyms and mental health are just, you know, they're crazy. So I'm just going to refer to it as the CAC. Look, it's a great group because, like I said, it's the peak body. Yeah, our job is just to carry those perspectives and advocacy directly to of the mental health, public health, delivery services. So, and that director reports to the board and director general. So I'm really privileged to quite soon be moving into a consultancy position in the health service. It terrifies me because with a privilege comes a lot of responsibility and accountability, but at the same time it really excites me because I love a challenge and growing, you know, personally and professionally. I have another role in the council. I'm going to be the project lead or manager for a very innovative new project, but I can't actually talk about it because it's in its planning and endorsement stage, but it's a consumer and community engagement project, and if my sources are correct, it'll be the first one of its kind in our government, in our statutory services in Australia, so I'm super excited. Wow, I've got a couple more roles. I'm trying to not spend too long on each. I do some board work for a community called the Recovery Rocks Community Incorporated here in the south of the River region. It's a peer-run, peer-led mental health related recovery support community. It was founded by a wonderful lady, Amanda Wagley, one of our worthy contributors to our consumer movement here in WA. And it was featured in a UK journal article actually for its unique sort of setup and structure. I've been on a leave of absence for a big chunk this year because it's been pretty much the busiest year of my career and my life. First year as working mum, but I'm hoping to go back there in the new year. I do participate in a WA Open Dialogue working group. And Pat, by the way, I know you've got Open Dialogue over there and pod trials and it's all over London, but here in WA it's not landed. It's not established and it's not embedded. So one of the focuses of our group is to try and establish our sort of a WA model that we can promote and get into all our services here and get it embedded. The group I'm in has a sort of a diverse range of some volunteer. We're all meeting up voluntarily to do this. And they're starting to deliver some open dialogue. So we're really just learning and feeling our way. We just made a submission to the Mental Health Commission here about open dialogue. So yeah, it's a wonderful group. I'm very passionate about it, and I'm going to touch on open dialogue a bit more later. And I do just do some advisory and consultancy roles. I worked with WAM on their impact project, which was the increasing membership participation advocacy co-design and co-training project. We
so
love acronyms. So really it was just a unique course, very different to any other courses on that subject delivered here in WA. It had a mentoring package with it, and it was a whole series of courses, just not like a one-day workshop that you get here or there on 5 hours on co-production. It was a really comprehensive course, so that was exciting. And most recently, I was a that's another acronym, SME, subject matter expert for the WA Recovery College Model Expert Panel. And that was super exciting because we don't have a recovery college system, anything robustly utilised here in WA. And our job was to work at the Mental Health Commission and draft the model of service, which was just a mind-boggling job because WA is really quite different in many ways to other places, so it had to be quite a bespoke model. And that model was for the Minister, or our State Premier and Federal Minister of Health and Mental Health to take to Cabinet, because recovery colleges were actually an election promise here just recently. So that was a wonderful learning experience, and I think that whenever I'm thought to be or labelled, you know, an expert, I think I learn as much as I contribute. You know, I think I don't think anyone can really know everything about mental health, because it's just, especially mental health, because it's such a fluid space. Things always changing and evolving, and you always learn from the perspectives of other people that you meet, you know. So really a mental health career actually mirrors a mental health recovery in a way, because there's no end to the growing and learning experiences. So I kind of consider myself forever a student in this field. I'm personally not that keen on the phrase recovery, and there's lots of reasons for that, but I prefer the word discovery, and I think that applies to me personally more. I think that what I did in my so-called recovery was more of a process of re-identification and a bit of reinvention, and I'm authoring a book on reinvention and re-identification, and postulating that it could actually be a fourth recovery framework after our three main ones: clinical, social and personal. So I'd really like to get that published next year. Wow, I think there's a couple of other things. I've got all these notes here of things to remember to say. Oh, and my last, the other thing role that I took on this year was as a peer ambassador for Sane Australia. Sane Australia is one of our largest Australian mental health organisations. And I took the role primarily because I actually really wanted to seize opportunities that align with my special interest area, which is advocating for alternative frameworks. I think that our mental health organisations here could be a bit more inclusive, especially regarding language, and just generally be more progressive. I'm not actually that keen on the name of the organisation, SANE, and a lot of people aren't. I've read papers on saneism. I think it's a very harmful binary concept in mental health. But however, SANE is a wonderful organisation. They do an awful lot of great work in advocacy and research. They support a lot of people. SANE's a very proactive organisation, and I fully align with their values and their mission, and I'm really proud to be SANE ambassador. And I guess in amongst all that, I'm running my little business in mentoring, advocacy, speaking, consultancy. So if anyone viewing this wants to learn a little bit more about me and my passions and my interests, you can find me at throughtherabbithole.com. I did actually, this was supposed to be a beautifully laminated framed sign, but that didn't work out for me. So throughtherabbithole.com. Yeah, so I just do all of these different things all at once. There's probably other things I've forgotten to mention, as you do, but I find all of my work super challenging, interesting, fulfilling and rewarding. Wow, that was a really big introduction. I'm sorry, I just have too many jobs.
Thank you. I mean, I should have maybe said that I met you in New York. We were at an international conference on mindfulness and therapeutic approaches, and you gave an absolutely amazing presentation about your experience, and I think you really did wow the audience, and I did come up to you afterwards to speak to you about that. I think when you finished, your impact was so great, you could have heard a pin drop in the room.
Oh, thank you, Pat, you're very kind.
So the presentation you gave was really interesting, and when you were talking, I was just making a few notes about a few of the things you said, and I really liked when you said about it's a journey of discovery for you, and that you never stop learning. And I think as a therapist as well, for the last 20 years of working clinically, I have seen this change in service users being more actively involved in planning in their caring. I think there's been a shift of, treatment being done to somebody as opposed to being done with them. And that's really nice. I think there's probably still a long way to go. And it just reminded me of that very humbling experience I often have with clients of really learning more about myself and learning more about humanity by understanding other people's experiences and really getting to find out more about their experiences. And, you know, the amount of things you do, I got this idea, and you touched upon it yourself, of it's a never-ending process of discovery, not recovery. And I guess you might have a similar, I have similar concerns about the term resilience. I think resilience, people kind of think of it as bouncing back and getting to where they were previously. But to me, resilience is about taking the opportunity to rediscover, to reinvent, to be something different to what you were previously. And maybe recovery and resilience imply that you're poorly and you get well and you stay. Whereas I think having this idea of discovery and having this idea of growth, it's you're poorly, you kind of get to be as good as you can, you get to be as well as you can, but you don't stand still in that one place. You continually grow and you continually develop. And it sounds like we both have that idea about it's such a fluid process and it's constantly changing. The question I was going to ask next is about what motivates you to do what you do. And one of the things I felt is you've been able to get a real sense of meaning and purpose from your experience. So not only are you able to do something that is going to help others and is going to improve the system and the bigger picture, but also it feels that there's a very passionate sense of meaning and a sense of that you can help yourself and others. And that
simultaneously.
Part of your discovery and part of your growth. So, what is it that motivates you? If you could try and summarize that, as maybe quite briefly, just summarize what is it that motivates you?
Look, it could be a massive answer, so I'll just be relatively succinct. In real estate, we say location, location, location. With me, it's passion, passion, passion. And if you're going to work in the mental health space, you really have to be a people person. You've got to be a humanist, and you've got to be genuinely committed to improving the lives of others. And it doesn't matter which perspective that passion comes from, as long as there's a commitment to it at all levels. Like you say, I just want to use my experiences to help improve things, for others. And that's a really genuine commitment. And to advocate and really be a change agent for reform in the system, because I'm often in a privileged position where I am giving a representative voice. But I actually have 5 values that drive all of my work. And the first one is that I'm incredibly passionate about the deliverance of the consumer voice to executive levels. I believe in consumer and stakeholder accountability and transparency in our mental health services. I really value robust consumer representation, consumer engagement, and the principle that all health service stakeholder voices are acknowledged as equal and valued. And that's a really big one for me, especially as Deputy of the CAC. Like I said, I have a passion to be a change agent and work towards better service provision, co-production, evaluation, and general service reform here in WA. And at the end of all that, I'm really committed to consumer activism and the consumer movement. I'm always mindful of our forebears who endured so much and some real atrocities in psychiatry, and these people have fought very hard for our rights. At Curtin, we always refer to them as the giants whose shoulders we stand on. And so those are my 5 core principles that pretty much drive everything I do.
I was just wondering, I was just making a note of them, and I was just wondering if later on I can make them into an acronym.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, so it'd be, and I think what's really nice is, as you say, in the past, I think there was that sense of stigma, a sense of shame. If you had a mental health difficulty, you didn't really talk about it. Your family didn't talk about it. It was much more hidden. And there is that shift of saying, hey, do you know what? It's okay to be human. It's okay to suffer. It's okay to experience difficulties. Probably it's, as human beings, we've been going through this for thousands of years. It's probably going to carry on into the future. And, if anything by the statistics, it looks like it's going to get worse. So it seems that, why don't we learn from our experience? Why don't we learn from people who've actually been there and have gone through the journey of discovery? And what can we do different? And what can we do to make that journey as easy as possible? It's always going to be hard work. It's always going to be challenging, but we don't have to make a difficult situation worse by being insensitive, by not knowing and not being aware of the things that people need. And it sounds like part of your role and part of your mission and your passion is to help change that process. So it's a continually growing and organic process. And, one of the things that really appealed to me when I met you in New York is I could see the value of you talking to mental health practitioners. I could see you talking to them much more as peers. And I was wondering if, instead of sitting opposite somebody as a service user or as a patient, they actually had a conversation as an equal. It would really help reduce that discrimination. And that they say that communication and engagement is the key to addressing things like stigma and oppression and things like that, getting people to talk and challenging their own prejudices, their own stereotypes, their own assumptions. And sometimes we're not even aware of the assumptions. But if we only talk to people as I am the expert and this is the treatment you're going to receive, I don't think we change that dialogue. And it sounds like that's something that you're doing and really focusing on well with great vigor.
Yeah, because there is a massive power imbalance, in our system. And I don't know that everyone's aware of it and what levels are aware of it, but it's certainly there. And there's a phrase, and it goes like this: if you can't feel power, then you're the person who's got it. Because there's everybody else who is struggling and not having power and not having a voice, that feel the weight that scale's, tipping away from their favor all the time. And I loved doing some study actually on, I don't know if you've ever looked at it, Pat, but the Gaventa's Power Cube. Now, this is just a wonderful visual of, it's sort of like a four-dimensional, some barriers are there, but they're invisible. Some, there's global, there's national, there's local, there's invited spaces, there's claimed spaces, there's shared spaces. And I'm very aware of, all these power dynamics, and it's something I'd really like to shift. And you're right, let's do things side by side, in this very mutual, power sharing way would be a real change, a significant change.
And I think you're right. And when you said about not being aware of the power, it really made me think about just how you do need to be really tuned into that sense of power. And it's very easy to miss it. And if I'm used to being the expert and I'm used to being accountable and maybe accountable from a statutory position or, an employment position where I have to be responsible and I have to take charge, but then to work with you equally, I may come from that position of being much more powerful. And if the person I'm working with is used to being ignored, if they're feeling hopeless, if they're feeling helpless in their recovery, in their journey, in where they're moving forward to, it can often be very, very implicit. And we just probably adopt these roles without really being aware for it. And it made me wonder if I'm not sure if you do this, but I could imagine you doing a reflective practice with clinicians where you led that reflective practice would be a really good opportunity to help them reflect and to help them think about what that shift is like. And that would be interesting, because if you facilitated a reflective practice, in a way, you're in the position of power, you're coming with the expert, and it might be interesting to get people to tune into what they notice and how it makes them feel when they're in this very different position.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a wonderful exercise. I'd enjoy that.
So that would be good. I'm aware of the time, and
Yeah.
I'm sure that you're very busy and have things to do. What about the final question I just made a note of as well is for you to maybe talk about some of the things that you'd like to see happen in service reform, either in Western Australia, where that's going to be your area of expertise and knowledge, but also anything else that you could think, people listening from other parts of the world, if they were designing a service and developing a service or wanting to make that service as effective as possible, what sort of things do you think would be really helpful to be aware of and to include?
Yeah, look, it could be a massive question with about, 20 answers. I'm going to stick to sort of three things that I think about a lot and I try and advocate for a lot. And number one is that it became sort of painfully apparent to me after years of my own lived experience and hearing the lived experience of others, and obviously a bit of study at Curtin University, that when an individual presents to a mental health service provider for the first time, they're not actually offered a genuine choice, a choice regarding the framework of understanding that they wish to adopt and inform their care and support plans. And, choice is something that it's one of the principles of both person-centered care and trauma-informed recovery. And I just don't think that we're quite there yet, and we're not delivering it systemically. And what I mean by this is what we have in many Western countries, as in, here in WA, is a health service which operates exclusively from a biomedical, biodeterminist disease model of mental health care. That's the dominant framework. Psychiatry is the dominant framework, and it's actually not the only framework. There are other alternative frameworks of understanding mental and emotional distress that are just as legitimate and valid. And psychiatry is actually a concept, it's an idea, it's an understanding, it's a framework, it's essentially a social construct. And many of us activists go as far as saying that this actually is often a form of social control. And I love psychologists and psychotherapy, and people love DBT and CBT and all of these wonderful things, but I actually just view psychiatry as a it's a construct. And I think that it doesn't actually have a massive evidence base, and I think a lot of people think that it does. I actually don't think it has. From the studies that I've done, I'm not convinced. For example, schizophrenia. Most people have heard of schizophrenia. Most of society holds that dominant framework. It's a severe, enduring, debilitating mental disorder, and it's just accepted as a medical fact. And schizophrenia is classified in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, God, I'm getting my tongue tied, as organic brain disease. However, according to science, schizophrenia has a construct validity rating of 0. It has a descriptive validity rating of 0, a predictive validity rating of 0, a reliability rating of 0, and an inter-rater reliability rating of 0. That's the science in schizophrenia. Now, psychiatry has just dominated for so long, and it's really attributed this massive level of legitimacy, but some of us aren't convinced. And it's not my job to go around trying to convince people of how I feel. Everyone is entitled to their own framework. I've got my own. It's a trauma-only framework, which differs from the disease model that does have an acknowledgement to trauma, but extrapolates it to something else. And your experiences get pathologized down into symptoms of a disease. I have a different understanding of myself, and I'm entitled to that. So I think that it would be lovely to have a mental health service that firstly this is the way I would love it to go. So I present to a mental health service for the first time, and I'm asked in the first instance, what is my understanding of myself and my problems? Like, what's my framework, and why is that? And that's just acknowledged and, you know, accepted, okay? Because sorry, there was two sort of precursors to this, is that I really wanted a mental health service where the clinicians are trained critically. You know, Pat Bracken has done some great work in this field. You know, critical psychiatrists are those who actually go and teach psychiatry students to be critical in their field. So I wanted a system where clinicians are trained critically and are really aware and understand alternative frameworks and can genuinely collaborate. So when I turn up and I explain my framework, I really want that clinician to meet me where I'm at. But if I didn't have my own understanding when I first got there, it would be quite, would it be revolutionary if it happened here, if the psychiatrist or the clinician said, by the way, the disease model is the dominant framework, you know, here in this health service, but it's not the only one. There are other legitimate understandings all over the world, and that are legitimate. And so here's a list of references of alternative information that you can go and study and read. If you want to work in your own framework, just come back and tell me what that is, and I will meet you there. Now, obviously, someone comes back and says, look, I'm really into this. I like this language and I like this idea. Clinicians are obviously going to have some limitations in policies and procedures, because health service reform doesn't happen overnight and it takes decades. So there may be some things they just can't bend. They've got duty of care and risk assessments and all these things. So some things will be limited, but I would love clinicians to bend themselves as much to accommodate somebody else's framework of understanding and all their related choices. And in the least, if it's not possible to bend too much in certain circumstances, if a clinician can at least use all the terminology that the consumer has chosen, their language, their words, words and phrases they find empowering and meaningful to them, and that's the language that's used in the therapeutic relationship, then I think that would be a massive step forward. And that's actually not that hard to do. But getting to that point is the massive barrier, because psychiatry is the Western world's most dominant framework. We've been doing the same thing for decades and decades and decades and decades, and it just gets thrown down people's throat as a medical fact. Like, this is the only understanding. I'm a doctor, and we give doctors so much, you know, trust in so many things, and like I said, psychiatry is really it's an understanding, and it's not the only one. So you're quite entitled to sit there and go, well, no, I don't think it's a borderline personality. Oh, I don't think it's schizophrenia. I feel this, and you're not showing me any test results here of anything. So can we go with how I feel? You know, and it just doesn't happen, and it should happen, because that's genuine choice and that's genuine self-empowerment.
Do you know, just to stop you there, I wasn't sure if you were going to go into the next one, but I really wanted to say, when I work with clients and we talk about some of these things like self-harm and some of the unhelpful behaviours they do, you know, I'm often aware that their friends, their families, you know, people, you know, say working with somebody who uses drugs or self-harms or alcohol, and people say, oh, well, it's their choice. And I say, well, it's kind of like a Hobson's choice. Because when you self-harm, when you use drugs, when you use alcohol, when you do these things which are unhelpful, you don't have a choice, because there's no alternative. And listening to you, I was thinking we could probably take that up. You know, somebody presents to the mental health system and they're told there's a choice, you know, kind of superficially, and we've got the policies and the documentation say the person was offered a choice. But in your experience and the way you framed it, and I think I would agree in many cases, psychiatry is presented as the option, and because there's no awareness of the alternatives, the choice is a Hobson's choice.
Yeah.
I've got the medical approach,
Yeah.
or I've got nothing. But I'm getting so I think it's about maybe also educating not just service users and medics, but I was wondering, you know, before people even came into the services, if we looked at schools, we looked at organisations, we looked at the community, and we really did push those psychosocial things. I
Yeah.
worked with a very good psychiatrist on an intensive care psychiatric unit. And the first thing she would do is she would get the nursing staff to work on diet, sleep, routine,
Holistic.
and
Yes.
activity. And until those things were in place, she wouldn't change the medication. She might give small amounts of medication to help with things like sleep. But the plan was, it was always, I want those basic things in place. I now want you engaging with OT and engaging in therapies. And then we will look at medication, but we're not going to start with medication unless we need to use medication to get you to be able to engage with those things. And it was a really nice model she had, because myself as the psychologist, the OT, the nursing staff, the support time recovery staff, everyone was involved in that individual's care. And there was a plan of saying, we're going to get the basics in place. We're then going to look at this, we're going to look at this. And then if that doesn't change and that doesn't improve, we will look at the medication. But we want to look at the medication from the position where we've addressed the other things as well. And it sounds like that's
just, yeah, sensible and logical. And this actually leads really nicely on to my second point. The other thing that I would really love to see in WA is open dialogue, this network-centered therapy in all of our services. As I mentioned earlier, we don't really have it embedded here yet. It's not really been established and embedded in WA. So I'm just going to chat about it for a minute, if you don't mind, Pat, because some of the viewers who are viewing this here where I am may never have even heard of open dialogue. So it might be beneficial just to explain it as quickly as I can. Open dialogue is it's really a network-centered type of therapy, or as they prefer to call it, or as the founders and the people in Western Lapland who have been running this for the longest, that's where it was created. It's a way of being. And I did a little bit of training in it here, just a little bit. And in the words of Mia Kersey, who is one of the founders, she said, "This is not person-centered care. This is better than person-centered care. It's relationship-centered care." And so open dialogue is a little bit more holistic, and it sort of runs on this philosophy that a lot of our problems and our challenges stem from gaps in the relationships between people. There's this relational gap, and that actually if we were all in it and in open dialogue and healing together, then that's actually more effective for everyone, instead of just individualizing one person. You and me, we've got to do therapy. It's look, it's really, really great. And I'm aware that OD usually is done without medication, because the theory is that I mean, if you're enduring what they term psychosis, that doesn't prevent open dialogue sessions from commencing, because the theory is that you have to be in your authentic mind, because that's where the some of the problems are, and it's also where some of the solutions are. And like I said, in Western Lapland, where this was created, they've been running it nearly 30 years now, and people have been followed up many times, up to a decade after their open dialogue style of therapy, and they're still unmedicated, they're employed, they're in housing, and they clinically don't meet any diagnostic criteria for anything, for psychosis, for schizophrenia. I mean, Western Lapland had the highest incident rates of schizophrenia in Finland. They now have the lowest. They exponentially decreased the prevalence of that diagnosis. So it's amazing that you can heal people in that way without drugs, because in the Western world it's all about the prescription pad, and we're in the pocket of big pharma. Our psychiatrists are in the pocket of big pharma. It's been that way for a long time. I think we're pretty bad here, to be honest. I think they're probably worse in America. Yeah, and the other thing I like about open dialogue is that you don't get one therapist, you get two and sometimes three, and sort of the reason for that is that the two therapists, or the three, can turn to each other to do a reflection during the session, and that reflection is a really humane response. It's not a clinical interpretation, it's not a clinical response, and it's not finding a solution. It's two therapists going, wow, I really, oh, when I heard that, I really felt this way or that way. And it's a deeply reflective space. It's not it's quite different to what we do here, and that's not directed at the participants, and it's not a conversation with them. There's no eye contact with the participants. It's the two therapists sort of do this only to each other, and that sounds really weird, but there are reasons why that's done, and it's really effective. And I was really privileged to do a little bit of training and be part of a real open dialogue session with real clients, and it was one of the most powerful experiences in my career. And a couple of uniquities of it is that sessions can be up to, well, they're booked at a minimum of 2 hours, I think up to 4 hours. Some people in crisis can actually have therapists go and stay the night with them in their home. They take the care to you. There's all these things that are very, very different. But I think the challenge of getting this into WA, which is what I think we're going to find on our working group, the challenge of embedding it is that we're kind of the only place in the world that has this spread that we have. Geographically, we are a massive state. I think we cover half of Europe. My geography's not that good, but like, we're massive. Yeah. We have a massive cultural and linguistic spread. We have a lot of people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and an Indigenous population. We have rural, regional and remote areas, all with different cultures and languages. So we just couldn't pick up what you do in London and dump it in WA, because it wouldn't work. And the reason it wouldn't work is that it has to be, open dialogue has to come here as an actual service system. It's actually not just a type of therapy. Open dialogue is a service system, and that's how it works in Western Lapland. And I can foresee that our government would be a little bit reluctant to finance standard 3-hour appointments with 2 or 3 therapists. Yeah, it would be very hard to get it here, but that doesn't stop the group that I'm working on and some other individuals scattered around WA. We're all very passionate about it. So watch this space.
Do you know,
I'm hoping we can do this.
It's funny when you talked about the passion, and I thought of it earlier, and it's just, I did make a note of it. I was having a conversation with a social worker, a colleague of mine, and we were talking, just about the jobs we do. And, it was that I think when you work in mental health, it needs to be a vocation, not a job. And, that sense that you got there, that passion, that doing the extra, obviously we all need money to pay bills and mortgages and those things. But that sense that actually people who are drawn to this area, it's more than a job that's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It has to be something that you believe passionately in, you can make a difference with. It's more of a vocation. And I think that's a really powerful thing that you've touched upon. And also, when you mentioned about the funding, I was just thinking, okay, if I was a local authority, if I was a government, this is going to cost me so many hundreds of thousands. But how much would I save? How much does it cost when somebody is hospitalized? What's the cost of that care? But what's the social cost of them not working? What's the cost of them as a human being, to their family, to their friends, to themselves, to their children? And you start trying to work out, and I really do think that in many things like drugs and alcohol, in mental health, prevention is seen as expensive, but in the long run, it is cheaper than fixing things when they go wrong. And I personally don't think anyone is at school and when the teacher says, what do you want to be when you grow up, puts their hand up and says, do you know what, I'd like to be a drug user, I'd like to be an alcoholic, I'd like to have mental health difficulties, I'd like to be homeless.
I want to be a service user.
You know, I don't believe that this is a choice that anyone makes. I think we make unwise choices, we make unhelpful choices, we maybe respond to ways which we could respond to differently. But I think in life it's often a Hobson's choice. We respond at the time which makes sense at that time. And it's only later in years we realize that a series of small decisions and choices and experiences, but often we don't have an alternative. And I think one of the things I get from you is really advocating and pushing this idea that there are choices, there are alternatives. That's going to take money, and that leads us back to your final point, if I haven't taken away what you were going to say.
Yeah, and it also takes education, you know, and that's not just clinicians, that's the service users, consumers, the people with lived experience. They've got to be offered real education, and that's not the leaflet that you pick up in your community mental health clinic reception. That's not where you're going to find great alternatives, and you're just going to find that dominant disease model. And you know, that's why I'm so passionate about WA having a recovery college system. I'm really happy about the model that we've drafted, because I believe that using an educational platform for recovery has got to be the way to go. That's real choice, it's self-empowerment, self-agency, self-actualization, and let's go all the way to self-mastery. I think a lot of our services are offering this, let's get you stable and we'll keep you maintained, and as long as you're not actually in hospital and you're, you know, at home on your pension and you've got a hobby, that's your recovery outcome. Well, that's just not good enough. That's not genuine. It's not authentic living. There's no positive risk taking. There's no risk taking at all. There's no inspiration and zest for life. So my third point, we're going to do my third point. I actually just wanted to touch on trauma-informed care, and this is quite a quick point because I really don't think we're very, very good at trauma-informed care. It's something that we all know about, we're all trained in, there's always all these courses being offered, but I'm not sure that we're strongly enough encouraging clinicians and mental health professionals and support workers to continuously improve and continuously train and actually focus on it specifically in reflective practice. And that's very important. And you know, a trauma-informed service is when everybody, all staff, all people, all levels of the organisation are trauma-informed. They know the effects of trauma and re-traumatisation on individuals, families, communities, and it's an organisational culture. Now, that's different to trauma-specific services where these are trauma-specific interventions and assessments and treatments and recovery pathways. So I think we're pretty good at referring people to a trauma-specific service, and we know how to take care of people and get them to a trauma-specific service. And we're okay at operating in a trauma-informed manner once we've uncovered a trauma. So, oh, there's a trauma, I'll put my trauma-informed lens on and we're okay. That's not the same as operating a trauma-informed care service at all levels 100% of the time, because just because the trauma isn't in the assessment notes or isn't in the patient's plan doesn't mean it's not there. And I think we all recognise that most people that have a mental health diagnosis have probably encountered adversity and trauma in our lives. So we actually need to wear the trauma-informed lens all the time. And I think that that means literally everybody, your reception staff, your cleaner, your admin, your agency staff, because as an example, anyone who's in that building who may come into contact with a client coming in, if this client is having a sort of a you know, a moment or had started crying or something has happened, and the first person that actually is nearest them happens to be the cleaner, and that cleaner says something that they think would be helpful but is actually one of the phrases that we're trained not to say in trauma-informed care, then that can have that can really negatively affect someone's sort of that person's reaction and then their choices and pathways, because that when you disclose a trauma, that first reaction is going to elicit a certain reaction from you, positively or negatively, you know. And so I think that if just everyone had this training, and that works conversely, you know, if I'm there and I'm just having a real paddy, and you know, the agency admin person walking past said exactly the right thing because they were also trauma informed, then that's best for our services and our clients. And that was what led me into that point, is that here in WA we have quite a reactive system, and we really need to move a lot further away from that and into a preventative system, because it is more cost effective to have a preventative system than to have a high utilisation of crisis and emergency services. And we're still a little bit in that bubble of, oh, someone's in crisis, let's wrap around all these services. And then because of the funding, we're having some funding changes in some of our services here. We gradually claw away all those wraparound services. Oh, you don't need that now, you don't need that now. And then later, the person has a new challenge, a new life event to deal with, and then they're in crisis again because we took all the wraparound services away, because that will save money, right? If you're okay, then you don't need us. But I think as humans, we always need supports around us. We need these things. We need OTs, we need our social workers, we need our art therapy all the time. We need all these things. And so I think our funding doesn't always allow us to work in a preventative model. So yeah, that was, I guess, my final point. I would like to move away from this reactive service and into a real holistic, preventative, empowering, full of choice, open dialogue model. There you go, Pat. That's my idea.
Do you know, I really liked what you said, and actually I found it very validating for something I'm trying to do at the moment with an organisation, and something I've done in a past organisation. So one of my observations working in residential units or inpatient settings is that often, you know, we maybe have this pyramid where the psychiatrist might see them at a ward round once a week. The nursing staff might see them on a well, let's say psychiatrist there once a week, psychologist there a couple of times in sessions, OTs a little bit more frequently, nursing staff. And my observation was that the people who I felt often knew the service users better were the catering staff, because they would know who came in to eat, who didn't eat, if they ate or not ate, the housekeeping staff. And one of the things I was very, very keen to do, and there was agreement, but possibly resistance, is to say, you know, I actually think we need a holistic approach. And if we are going to involve service users in their care and be holistic, we should also be aware that as psychologists, psychiatrists, OTs, nurses, that the support time recovery staff have a voice, that the housekeeping staff have a voice, the maintenance keepers, the maintenance staff, the catering staff, because it's often when somebody's standing up in a queue for their food that the kitchen staff will notice, do you know what, they didn't talk to me today, they normally do talk to me, today they didn't eat. And I found that you got such rich information from those staff who actually had a more human relationship, because it wasn't professional. And often
non-clinical.
And often staff would say to me, you know, maintenance staff would come to me and say, you know, they'd know that I was a psychologist, and they would say, look, you know, I was, you know, I was doing the gardening and tidying up, and service user was very distressed, and they were very tearful, and they were by themselves, and I didn't know if I should say something. What should I have done? And I said, and they said, well, I just spoke to them as they were a normal person. And I said, well, that's probably the most powerful thing you can do. But they needed to be reassured that that was okay. And I really like this idea. Actually, do you know what? If we are going to involve the individual themselves in their care, we also need to involve those people who we work with who might not have a clinical role. And I still think organizations have a hierarchy. But also it made me think about some of the things that happen in positive psychology and, organizations trying to improve staff well-being and happiness. But, if you worked in these environments and you were a catering staff or housekeeping or maintenance, and you actually were aware of the direct input you could have in somebody's recovery, in somebody's well-being, it would probably be very empowering for you to see much more clearly the value of your role. So I could imagine it being if you had an organization, and I think inpatient units are quite good examples of this, because, we tend to know the catering staff, the housekeeping, the maintenance, because obviously we know each other very well. But maybe just removing those boundaries a little bit and saying, actually, you all have an opinion and we all have a role to play, might be a really nice way for us to model and demonstrate just genuine, authentic human connection. And I think that's kind of touches on what you were saying.
Yeah, that's a beautiful explanation, Pat. I love that. I think you're so right. It's not really just about this one person. We're all, all our supports and all our, in the world in general, we're all connected. Everybody's connected in some way or another. And I think if we all just, God, I can really go off, but I do agree. If everyone in a service and people who are even not in a clinical role can actually provide input and, have a bit of a buddy system with people, and if there was more connection between, different levels of staff and different roles, and everyone had their viewpoint acknowledged as, oh, well, that's pretty significant, and I respect that. If you said they've not eaten, twice today, and you know them, I'm going to use this information. You're involved now in the team. I mean, it just sounds wonderful. I'm not sure if we will. That'll be a long time before I think we get that.
As I said, I think it works in residential units and inpatient settings, because obviously you have that sense. We're obviously in the same environment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, pretty much.
I think you're right.
It would be harder to do in community settings, but, as you say, the receptionist, the people who have that day-to-day contact, you often find service users will, I had a client who used to chat away to the receptionist about what's going on in her life, while she was waiting for appointments, and even used to come early to have extra time to chat, and used to stay in the reception area and chat, and then she would come up in session and would very close down. And it was really interesting that this dynamic between, she felt able to talk to the receptionist, but when she talked to the psychologist, it was harder. And, I guess maybe that's the sense of my power, sense of being overwhelmed. But when she was able to talk in a more, so what we started to do with her is kind of have much more informal sessions. And, instead of having a session at the clinic, we went out and we had coffee and we talked in play, obviously, being careful and mindful of confidentiality. But we found that was a much more effective way for her to talk, because she found that one-to-one in a clinic too overwhelming. So it is being, and had I not spoken to the receptionist and found out this was going on, we possibly would have never discovered that there was a more effective way to offer support for this individual. So I think that's a nice example on what you've said about, involving the whole system. Phoebe, I'm aware of the time, and is there anything else you'd like to add? There's probably a lot.
Yeah, look, I think that's great for today. I feel that we've had a really great dialogue, and I love having these inspiring conversations and these little think tanks. You know, maybe one day soon we could do a think tank on Zoom, you know, or
What
something.
I
Right.
was I was thinking there's so much, and you know, I'll talk to you over the next few days or so, or weeks. It's coming up to Christmas, so it might be a bit tricky for both of us. But I was actually wondering if maybe what we try to do is over the next couple of months or so, had these kind of discussions to see what ideas we came up with. And I don't know how you feel about it, but and we can sound people out. But I wondered if we did it as a, you know, a Facebook Live or YouTube Live, but
That would be great.
a way that people could listen and ask us questions, and we could discuss it and see if we get a much more interactive dialogue. So let's both have a think about that. I think that would be a really nice thing to do, and certainly allow us to get a range of opinions from people around the world about their experience as a clinician and as an expert, but also from your position as people who use the service and an expert in that way, and maybe just start to have this nice dialogue where
I would love that, Pat.
So let's think about that as a plan for next year. Anything else you would like to add? It's been lovely to talk to you. Again, I know every time I speak to you, I tell you, but you know, your presentation in New York was amazing. I'm really disappointed that we were supposed to have videos for those talks in New York, but unfortunately, they got lost.
The last thing I'll say on our Zoom interview here is I've got a YouTube channel now, Through the Rabbit Hole Australia. It's got a few videos on it. There's still a couple more to go on. Now, I haven't officially launched my website or YouTube channel yet. I'm sort of going to be doing an event next year, which will be my official launch of my company, my YouTube. But if anyone viewing this just wants to go on and watch a few videos that are already there, and subscribe if you want, and you'll get all our Zoom chats too with Phoebe Kingston and Dr. Pat.
Okay, Phoebe, that's great. What I'll do is I'll end the recording now, and you and I can just have a quick catch up, and we'll work out what our next steps are.
Right. Thank you so much for this interview, Pat. Thank you.
Phoebe's pleasure. Bye-bye.